Got a whole lot of Banned Book Club for you today. Welcome to the second part of today's meeting of the Banned Book Club. Last hour, I outlined the months-long controversy and conflict between PEN America, a nonprofit dedicated to freedom of expression, and some of its members, including authors and staffers, over PEN America's response to the war in Gaza. Some members say PEN America has not gone far enough in defending writers in Gaza or in condemning civilian casualties at the hands of the Israeli military. This reached a fever pitch this past week after around 30 of the 87 nominees for PEN America's Literary Awards withdrew from consideration. The nominees wrote an open letter explaining their decision. It reads in part, quote, "PEN's statements and actions, and often the lack thereof, demonstrate not only an immoral reliance on corporate dollars, but also a serious deficit of writerly courage. PEN America states that the core of its mission is to support the right to disagree. But among writers of conscience, there is no disagreement. There is fact and fiction. The fact is that Israel is leading a genocide of the Palestinian people. PEN's perpetuation of false equivalences, their equivocation and normalizing, is indeed a betrayal," end quote. Last hour, I spoke to PEN America CEO Suzanne Nossel. Here's what she had to say about the authors' protest.
In the early days of the conflict, we were standing in solidarity. We wanted to make those general expressions. And then from that time on, we really made the commitment. We're going to focus specifically on the free expression angles of this. We're not a humanitarian organization. We're not an organization that really engages in or has expertise on issues of armed conflict. So we've strived since then really to kind of stick to our lane, decrying infringements on freedom of speech, on what's happening to writers inside Gaza. We've called out the government of Israel many times about their rhetoric against journalists, just recently about the effort to cancel Al Jazeera, about attacks on culture. But we also do look at the complexity of this situation. We don't view it through a single binary lens. We're, by design, a Big Tent organization.
The PEN America Literary Awards scheduled for this Monday are canceled. And just yesterday, PEN America announced the cancellation of its World Voices Festival, an annual week-long festival which includes events, readings, conversations, and debates with writers from around the world. While this is not a story that is so easily surmised in a few sentences or with just one or two examples, at the center of the controversy is a question of what free speech looks like in America today, of what free speech will look like in America going forward. And now it's the author's turn to speak. I have with me two of the authors who withdrew their work from consideration at the PEN America Literary Awards. Hassan Zinedine is the author of Dearborn, a collection of stories that explore the Arab-American community in Dearborn, Michigan. James Frankie Thomas is the author of Idlewild, the story of two adults reflecting on their friendship as queer teens in Manhattan. I want to thank both of you for joining me, and I do want to clarify, neither of these books has been banned, as far as I know, just yet. But this is America in 2024, so perhaps as we're speaking, they're being banned. Regardless, you are here for some other reason, and I welcome you both. Hassan, let me start with you. I want to just get your reaction to what Suzanne Nossel said in the last hour. It's a Big Tent organization, not a humanitarian group, and that since the initial criticism, they have leaned into the protection or the criticism of Israel in terms of the protection of writers, poets, and authors. What's your reaction to what Suzanne had to say?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad to be here and to share this space with James as well. Just a clarification, like the sound bit that you just aired, Susan said Israel's rhetoric against journalists is actually assassination of journalists. So there have been, over 100 Palestinian journalists who have been assassinated by the Israeli military. And also, you have academics who have been assassinated. You have universities that have been destroyed. Hospitals have been destroyed. So I think when it's framed in such a way where the rhetoric against journalists, no, it actually plays into what's going on in Gaza and in the West Bank and the terrible atrocities that are occurring against Palestinian people. So I think the way that Susan phrased it was more about a debate about free speech, when this is actually a genocide that's happening, and we really have to confront it and try to stop it and try to save Palestinians' lives.
James, what's your take?
Yes, I agree with everything Ghassan said. I'm happy to see him and happy to be here with you. And I just think it's obscene to frame any of this as a question of free speech in America. I mean, the equivocation around what's happening in Gaza, it is a genocide. And to avoid that word is I can only see it as an intentional avoidance of the truth. What Suzanne said about about the PEN organization staying in its lane. I mean, its mission statement, if you look at the website, PEN America says that it stands at the intersection of literature and human rights. There is a world historical human rights violation happening in Gaza right now. And PEN has a very consistent track record of supporting writers who are oppressed in other countries. And for them to not even acknowledge the scale of what's happening and the evil and enormity of what's happening in Gaza feels so sketchy that I had to conclude that this is an organization I don't want to be publicly affiliated with.
Ghassan, what's the degree of sentiment amongst the writers? And I know you're not sort of an organizer of it, so maybe you don't know. Yeah. But what's the sense of, I sort of get it that maybe PEN didn't handle this as deftly as they could have in the beginning, but fundamentally you think that the mission is right. Or do you think that PEN has gone off the rails in terms of its mission?
I think they've gone off the rails in terms of their mission, and it's just actually clear. It's clear in their messaging. You know, what James just alluded to, like the failure to kind of recognize the atrocities that are going on in Gaza. And it wasn't until, if I'm not mistaken, until March, maybe March 24th, and like 5 months into the genocide, that actually the organization called for a ceasefire. And I just want to point out that, you know, PEN America, I mean, the PEN organization is an international organization. They have other chapters across the world. And those other chapters, including the one in South Africa, were vehemently, you know, fighting on behalf of the Palestinians' rights. So, I mean, we're talking specifically about PEN America. There are other chapters who have actually spoken out against the atrocities that have been going on.
James, let's talk about the other thing Suzanne mentioned, and she said that they are a big tent organization and that not everybody is going to think the same way. So let's get it out of the free speech lane for a second and talk about writers will think about things differently. How do you think about that as somebody who was a nominee for a PEN Award, that you might be nominated alongside somebody who looks at the Israeli-Gaza situation and doesn't see it the way you do? How do you reconcile that?
I mean, of course, I see where you're coming from, and there are multiple sides to any situation, but the fact of the matter is we could play that game forever about so many things. I don't think PEN America would agree that it is a good use of anyone's time to debate on whether the sky is blue or whether it is currently raining outside. Some things are simply not up for debate, and I was so deeply disturbed to see PEN America frame the genocide in Gaza as something that writers could respectfully disagree on. I just don't think that's something that's up for debate. I think there are some things that are not within the realm of dissent and friendly disagreement, and I really think it's obscene to distract from the atrocities and horrors that are happening in Gaza by just falling into this strange, abstract, intellectual discussion that is just so far removed and so alienated from just the violence and the horror. And anyone who can see this and deny that that's what's happening is someone who is not operating in good faith.
Ghassan, what does success look like for you for either PEN America or organizations that in theory are supposed to be a place of solidarity for writers and represent the freedom of expression and safety for writers and journalists and poets and authors?
I mean, it's to do it through actions. I mean, that's the thing. There are a lot of other organizations that have shown solidarity with Palestinians. I go back to like the messaging, and I just don't think PEN America has done enough to really highlight what's going on and trying to protect basic human rights in Gaza and in the West Bank. So it's really a matter of just actually, you know, putting things into action. And obviously, they just haven't been doing that.
Now, some organizations, as we were talking about earlier, 92Y, the Frankfurt Book Festival, they actually went further. They had forums in which they had Palestinian writers or people who had expressed sentiments toward Palestinians, and they canceled them. Suzanne makes the point that PEN didn't get involved in that and was very critical of that in the beginning. Are you thinking there's space for a reconciliation between authors like you and PEN to say, here's what we've learned from this, here's how we move forward?
Well, I do think it's worth pointing out that the actions of the authors who have boycotted the organization and pulled out of the festival and the awards, these actions are already having an effect.
Well, they canceled both events.
They canceled both events, and they have diverted some of the prize money to Gaza relief. I think this is a really exciting example of how collective action and indeed writers expressing themselves and expressing their consciences can actually have a material impact. PEN has released some statements that they had not made before in response to this outcry. So, I think that writers have to keep expressing themselves and doing what they've been doing. And in general, I think that the expression and the protests to draw attention to the genocide in Gaza is having an effect and needs to keep happening. And I hope PEN continues to listen. And I think that Suzanne ought to listen too.
Hassan, how about for you? The progress that James just talked about, the steps that PEN has taken, do they go any distance in satisfying you?
I mean, there's still a lot more work that they have to do, and I just want to say, James and I withdrawing from the PEN Awards, it's part of a line of resistance that writers have shown against the organization. I mean, back in March, there was a letter that was signed by many prominent writers, including Naomi Klein, Susan Daraj, Zaina Arafat, and Hisham Matar, and they were, pulling their names from the PEN World's Voices Festival, which actually just got canceled too. And so it's still, I don't think we can let our guard down until we just see, again, concrete steps that the organization is taking. And I think that they really have to look inward from top down to see, to kind of reassess their messaging. And I do want to point out, I don't think all members of PEN America, I think it's not a monolith. I think some people do want change, but I think the leadership really has to look inward and see how they can actually improve the situation.
James, what are you finding in the literary community around this? I mean, obviously, book banning has caused a whole lot of people who had nothing to do with each other, writers who had nothing to do with each other, to come out and start to support each other and realize that there is this network of writers who have strong beliefs about things. Tell me how this has affected you.
I have found it to be, once you get to talking to people, pretty unanimous. Everybody feels the same way. I mean, I have not personally encountered another writer who is not horrified by the equivocation of PEN America and is not hoping on some level for Suzanne to step down because she has handled this so poorly. And I think that the only reason it took as long as it did for a critical mass of writers to withdraw from the awards and the festival was that people were scared and they were worried about their careers. And I think it is so amazing to see people listening to their consciences.
Well, tell me about that, because you're young.
I'm not as young as I look. I'm 37.
For me, that's very young. Tell me about whether are you concerned about the effect that these things have on your careers? This is, as you told me when you came in, you've never been on TV before.
This is true, yeah.
This is new to you.
This is new to me, and of course I'd be lying if I denied caring about my career at all. Of course I care about my career, and I thought about this a lot before I decided to withdraw from the awards. But the fact of the matter is I knew that I would not be able to live with myself if I were publicly affiliated with this organization that I feel so disgusted by. Nobody will remember, I think, in the long run, who won what award, but I will always know what decision I made during this critical moment in history. And the conscience is forever, and I knew what would help me sleep at night, and my sleep is important to me, and feeling good about myself, my self-respect is important to me, and I think when you talk to most writers, they do feel the same way. If writers are feeling shame about being affiliated with an organization that they feel disgusted by, that is an emotion I think it is important to listen to, because ultimately you are the one who has to live with yourself inside your body.
Well, we're going to remember that this was your first time on TV, so we appreciate you being here. James Frankie Thomas is the author of Idlewild. Hassan Zenedine is the author of Dearborn. Thank you to both of you for being here. We appreciate it.